Hello everyone, Eric Hurst here from my home gym. We're going to do a little bit of a live demo today, hopefully without any technical difficulties. I've had a rough run here launching these training cafes. I think on 3 of the first 7 broadcasts there was some issue. One week it was a storm going through and a power outage. And then on Monday it was the battery pack here that runs my wireless mic system went dead. So I have fresh batteries in today, so hopefully we'll have no issues there. And I have a nice strong internet signal, so I think we're going to have hopefully a good 20 or 30 minute show for you here. Of course, like all training cafes, we begin with us communing a cup of coffee. Let's take a sip together. Coffee makes everything better, including the training cafe. This week's shout out, before I forget, my friend Chris Hampton, my kids call him O-Dub, his book, fresh off the presses, The Hard Truth. Of course, Chris is a longtime climber, like 25 years. He's been coaching for probably close to 10 years. One of the smartest guys I know when it comes to training for climbing. And this is a fun book. It's a quick read. And if you can get your hands on a copy, go to the Power Company website. That's Chris's company that offers training services, and now this great little book. So check that out. Okay, so that's the Training Cafe shout out. Here's what I have planned for today. I want to talk a little bit about training at home. You know, most of us have been on lockdown for 7 weeks now. If you're lucky, you have some kind of a home gym with climbing walls and variety of instruments like we have. But some folks, you know, I think back to my early days, just had a hangboard in an apartment. And that's all that perhaps is available to you. And so, yes, hangboard training is great for keeping some strength and endurance in your finger flexors. But there's more to climbing, of course, than just grip strength. And so if that's all you're doing for a couple of months and then you head outside to return to climbing this summer, you might have a crushing grip, but you might be lacking elsewhere. So you need to, of course, try to train your whole body, your core, your shoulders, and hit the different angles. You know, rock climbing, we just don't climb vertical walls. We just aren't dangling vertically as you do in your hangboard. But you need to be able to train and work all the different vectors, all the different angles that you might encounter. And so if you can build some of that into your program, incorporating other muscle groups than just your finger flexors, then you'll do a better job staying in shape, or maybe getting in better shape while you're on this period of self-quarantine. So I want to take you just through some exercise ideas. I'm not going to really do a workout here. That would be boring for you to watch me work out. But I'm going to give you some ideas about what muscle groups and what simple things you could build or utilize to make your training more effective. Before we get there, I wanted to have one follow-up question. The last couple of training cafes have talked about energy system training as a conceptual model to organize for more advanced climbers to organize their training. And I just wanted to give a little bit of clarity because I got several questions after the last live stream, and I saw a few questions before I went on air today asking about energy system training. And the concept is that there are 3 bioenergetic systems that power our muscles, that produce ATP, which of course is the fuel for exercise. There's the alactic system, which gives you those brief bursts of power, doing a maximal pull-up, a hard boulder move, a maximal grip, a campus move. That's alactic power. When you do hard moves for a period of time, 10 seconds to a minute, that's when the anaerobic lactic system takes over. Now, all energy systems are contributing all the time to ATP production, but there tends to be one that dominates. And between 10 seconds and 1 minute of all-out exercise or near maximal exercises, as in doing a long, hard boulder problem or a crux move, that becomes very lactic. That's that energy system that breaks down glycogen. It's not as fast as the alactic system, but it's still pretty fast. I mean, it's still fairly powerful, but it has byproducts that pump you out, that make your muscles burn, and your brain down regulates your power very rapidly from 30 to 60 seconds, your power starts to drop. And then after about 60 seconds, the aerobic energy system really is the primary pathway by which ATP is supporting sustained exercise. If you're exercising or climbing longer than a minute or intermittently, it becomes more aerobic and less anaerobic. Though, anaerobics, all three systems are still contributing to some degree. So the philosophy is to effectively train adaptations, you want to target one energy system per workout. So do max hangs and weighted pull-ups and hard bouldering all in the same workout because they all tend to mostly target the alactic system. And then do a separate workout like repeaters that is more the anaerobic lactic, or even if you do the repeaters with less resistance, it becomes more aerobic. Route climbing tends to be more aerobic, bouldering tends to be more anaerobic. Though again, all three energy systems are contributing. So the philosophy is when you're a highly trained climber, that's been doing it for several years, or an elite climber, you need to have more nuance in your training to eke out those little bits of extra results, little gains season over season or year over year. If you're a beginner, you can just climb. You can just do some generalized training. You don't have to be super scientific about it. You have to be smart so you don't get injured or overtrain. A beginner shouldn't jump on a hangboard and try to pull on monos. That would be foolish. But to get into energy system training in your first year or two of climbing probably isn't necessary. So it all depends on who you are, how experienced you are at training, how far you are up that learning curve and strength curve, how close you are to your genetic potential, because those gains become harder and harder each and every season and year. And so you need more science, you need more nuance. You need to, find just what is your weakness and address it. And that's where energy system training can come in really handy. Now, don't take it so far as one questioner asks, saying that, well, if I go to the gym and I'm training, more power bouldering type movements, does that mean I can't do a few roped routes? Of course not. You can still do a few routes on the wall. You could use them as part of a warm-up or cool down just to get the blood circulating and get a light pump. That wouldn't be a bad idea. What you don't want to do is mix together a really hard bouldering workout and a really hard route climbing workout, or doing a lot of max strength exercises like max hangs and weighted pull-ups or one-arm pull-ups, and then in the same workout do sets, 10 sets of 10 pull-ups, which is a lot more of a strength endurance exercise, or doing a bunch of repeaters, 10 sets of repeaters after you did your max hangs. That would be probably unwise, and you aren't guaranteed to get good adaptations. You create a lot of fatigue. It makes you think you had a good workout. And that's a big problem with us climbers. We like to work out hard. We know that when we climb at our limit, we get pumped, we get super fatigued. So you think you need to go to the gym, whether it's at home or at a commercial gym, or go to the crag, and you have to destroy yourself each and every day. Hey, I've been there, I've done that. But to go with such a shotgun approach and just do a lot of everything in your workout, and max strength, anaerobic endurance, aerobic endurance, well, then you're really not targeting any one energy system all that well. And in terms of the signaling for adaptations, it's just not effective. There's a lot of what's called interference, or researchers that have studied these things, not with climbers, but there's enough research with other athletes and other sports to know that, if you do a lot of everything in the same workout, then you're training very little of anything. You're not getting a lot of meaningful results. So there's just a quick flashback or return to energy system concepts. I've written extensively about it. My Training for Climbing book has a whole section on it. A couple of years ago, I did a series of 4 or 5 podcasts, the Training for Climbing podcast. There's probably 5 hours of content on energy system training. If you go back and revisit those, it's almost like a college lecture or education on energy system training. And so if you're the type of person that likes to understand the science and how to best apply it to what you do, then go visit those podcasts. There's a lot of information there. You might need to listen to them several times each. Okay, let me grab another sip of coffee. You're welcome to as well. Got my Cafe Craft mug here from Nuremberg. Okay, so let's talk about training, how to mix things up. If you've been doing a lot of hangboard training, as I think most climbers around the world have been, if you've been doing 7 weeks of hangboard training, most training programs after, 6 or 8 weeks, oftentimes a good coach will say, hey, you need a deload week. You need a week to dial things back. You need a week to actually maybe stop your heavy training. Let your body catch up. Because, week over week over week for 7 weeks of hard hangboard training, that gets tough. Though you might not sense it, your connective tissues, your finger flexor tendons, your pulleys, maybe your elbows, your shoulders, maybe, have lost some homeostasis. There might be some, slight collagen disorganization. The remodeling process of connective tissues is slower than that of muscles. And so when you're training really hard for many weeks, the connective tissues tend to fall behind, and hence a lot of people get injured. That's overtraining. And so first of all, if you have any sense after 7 weeks of training at home on a hangboard that your fingers are starting to hurt, your elbows or shoulders are starting to hurt, maybe what you need is a week off where you just do some antagonist training, some core training, go out and do some running or do some walking and take a break from the hangboard for a few days or a week. Or maybe it's just time to mix things up. And instead of if you've been doing a lot of max hang protocols, maybe it's time to do some moving hangs. And that's maybe something that not a lot of people do on a hangboard because it's awfully boring. But I don't know if you can see me here. Perhaps John, my producer here, can adjust the camera. But here I have a hangboard. And instead of doing regular hangs, I have a foot strip here on the wall. Or if you have yours under a doorway, you could put a chair or a stool or something to rest your feet on. And moving hangs, you kind of move your hands around the hangboard. And because your feet are on, much less resistance is being placed on your hands. And so you can move around the board, you can shake out, and it becomes more like climbing a route. And you can, grab some smaller holds, and you can kind of keep that cadence of your climbing where you're changing grips every, 3 to 5 seconds, and occasionally hitting a bucket, and then occasionally hitting a pocket. And if you do a moving hang, if you put on a timer or a stopwatch for, 4 or 5 minutes and continue going, what you shouldn't do is fail, because you're not training max strength, you're training endurance. And because you're moving your hands around and you're letting blood flow, there's a lot of, reoxygenated blood getting into the system. And so moving hangs are a great way to train that local aerobic energy system, which if you're a route climber is extremely important. And to some degree, even if you're a boulderer, some boulder problems take a minute or more to climb. And so the aerobic system is taking over. And so doing some moving hangs is one way to be mostly aerobic. Now, if you do repeaters with dangling feet, the repeater protocol, like a 7-3 repeater protocol or a 10-5 repeater protocol, that also allows some blood to flow. That also allows the aerobic energy system to contribute. But repeaters, especially if you're training at a high intensity, at 8 or 9 out of 10, become quite lactic. And so it trains both, the anaerobic and the aerobic energy system. But the moving hangs, because the feet are on and because you're only grabbing holds maybe at 30% of your maximum voluntary contraction, you're not occluding the blood flow all that much. And so it's more aerobic than anaerobic. And so you could do 5-minute moving hangs, step off the board and rest for a few minutes, get back on, do another 5 minutes, and maybe over the course of an hour, end up spending 30 minutes of an hour doing a moving hang. Now, again, it will be boring. Put some good music on to entertain yourself and pass the time. And in your mind's eye, maybe think about outdoor climbing and think about the body positions, because the more you can twist and turn while you're doing moving hangs, and moving around the board, again, you're mixing things up. You're hitting your shoulders, your scapular stabilizers, your back in a different way than just when you're dangling from a hangboard. And so that's kind of what I wanted to get at today, was how you can mix things up. And the moving hangs with your feet on a wall or on a chair is a great way to do it. And because it's at much lower intensity, it isn't as stressful on your connective tissues. And in a way, it's almost a recovery workout. If you keep it low intensity, if you're not getting all that pumped, and if you're not grabbing tweaky holds, it's almost like active recovery for someone who's used to doing really hard climbing. Now, again, don't go seeking the pump if you're doing moving hangs, because that's not the purpose of doing the moving hangs. It's to train the aerobic energy system, more like arc style training that you would do at a climbing gym, where you're climbing at a moderate intensity and never getting deeply pumped and really acidic. Because again, that's the anaerobic, that's training anaerobic system adaptations. Now, some other exercises to kind of mix things up and hit things at some different angles. Perhaps you're doing pull-ups on your hangboard, or if you have a pull-up bar that you're doing, standard pull-ups on. Well, if you can, either using the pull-up bar, or ideally if you have a sling trainer available, these are TRX straps, but you could even make a sling trainer using some climbing slings. You can do, instead of normal pull-ups, you could do rows, and you could do sets of these rows, nice and controlled, keeping your chest out, not letting your chest cave in. And of course, you can change the angle, like if you're hanging upside down underneath an overhang, you could even, as you're pulling up, move one hand out of the way, and therefore train more of a lock off on the other hand. So using a sling trainer, and instead of just doing the same old pull-ups in the same plane, switch things up, and you'll hit very different muscle groups in your back. You'll get the rhomboids and the trapezius more engaged. You'll get your core engaged in a different way. So that would be one really good way to mix things up. And if you do have a sling trainer, well, why not work some scapular stabilizers? This is a very important training, really, that I think all climbers should do probably 2 days per week, is doing T's. Okay, so I'm pulling my scapula together. It's called a T because my body's kind of taking on the shape of a T. Then Y's. And then finally I's, where the hands go over your head, kind of like a touchdown signal. And these should not be at like high intensity. You want to adjust the straps and move your feet so that they're, moderate intensity, so that you can do 8 to 10 reps, maybe even 12 reps to develop the scapular stabilizer strength. Ease into these exercises if you've not done them before, because it'll be kind of a shock to the system till you get the motor learning and kind of get the kinesthetic awareness of what is going on. But to gain that kinesthetic awareness, to have a better sense of your shoulder positioning and scapula anchoring in different planes of movement, climbing on different angle walls, that's critical to becoming a more effective climber. Being able to apply forces more effectively, to move more efficiently. Your hands and feet, well, they're the context to the climbing wall, but of course your shoulders, the mobility of your shoulders, the placement of your center of gravity is what ultimately determines how efficient the movement is. You know, how much energy leaks you have while you're climbing. And that's really one of the big secrets of master climbers, is that they are super efficient in their movement. They're not wasting energy. And so that should be your goal. And to have a more balanced body, better climbing posture, well, that's hugely important. And you know, a coach that can work with you one-on-one is the best way to improve in those areas if you're new to climbing. But doing some basic exercises and being disciplined. You know, the fingerboard, it doesn't take much convincing to an enthusiastic climber that they should do some fingerboard training. And if anything, an enthusiastic climber might do too much fingerboard training. But it probably does take convincing to get climbers to do stuff like sling trainer exercises. But they are essential, in my opinion. Oh, and by the way, you can also do some like pec fly type exercises. You know, it's kind of like gives you the feel of a compression move in climbing. And you can do some rollouts that are a great exercise as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, well, I guess the final.
Choppy. Just give it a sec to catch up.
Okay, I hear the signal may be choppy a little bit, but the battery pack's good, so we'll forge on here. One more thing, rotator cuff, the 4 small muscles that comprise the rotator cuff. Doing some training of them, some isolated training, is also important. I have an elastic band here attached to a pole that I'm doing internal rotation, and I can do external rotation. Now, there's not a lot of resistance here. These stretchy bands are great for kind of warming up the shoulders before you climb, before you train, doing a few minutes of this type of thing. Even taking one of these bands to the crag and doing some internal rotation is a great idea. But to really strengthen the rotator cuff muscles, I'm a believer that you need a little more load than that. And that's where if you lay on your side and use some 10 or 15 pound dumbbells to train the internal and external rotation, that could be something beneficial as well for most climbers to do a couple days a week. And again, that's going to hit your shoulders in a completely different way than dangling on a hangboard. And if you're spending a lot of time dangling on the hangboard, then you need to be doing that antagonist training, all the pushing and all the different, you know, motions that we've just kind of reviewed here with the TRX trainer. Okay, to wrap things up here, let's talk a little bit about the wrist. Okay, now people ask me, what about pinch training? Well, I have one hangboard that has some pinch grips on it, and I use it on occasion to warm up. But I really feel that dedicated pinch training should not be done on a hangboard. We do enough hanging on our arms when we're climbing and we're hangboard training or doing pull-ups. A better way to do pinch training, I believe, is to have a loading pin with some free weight plates on it, or a dumbbell with a sling, and then have one of these nifty pinch blocks. There's a few different companies that make these. This is the tension block here. And to train pinch at your side, standing upright with good posture, I think is a great way to do it, because as long as you keep your shoulders leveled and your hips leveled, you're calling in very different muscles compared to hanging on the hangboard. Your QL is coming into play here to keep your hips level. Your shoulders, your trapezius muscles are working to keep your shoulder, you know, in proper position. You don't want to have your shoulder dangling down like that. And you also don't want to have it shrugged up like that. You want to stand pretty much even shoulders, and then do your pinch exercising at your side. And by the way, to be most effective, when you're pinch training, obviously your finger flexors are working, right? But they're, you know, they've already been trained with your hangboard training, with your climbing. So what, you know, when we're pinch training, we're really after is the muscle that controls that last digit of your thumb, the flexor pollicis longus. And so to train that muscle when you're pinching, the important thing is to not go deep onto the pinch block with your thumb, but to only pinch with the first digit of the thumb. I did a video on this. If you go back in the Training for Climbing channel on YouTube or on my website, that talks exclusively about pinch training. But you see how my thumb, only that first joint is pinching. And again, the other fingers, yeah, they're pinching as well. But we're not doing pinch training for your fingers. We're doing pinch training for that thumb. Okay, so that's an important technical nuance that will give you meaningful results. If you're disciplined, if you can't hold with just that first digit, if you have to go deeper, well, then you're using too much weight. Okay, do the exercise right. More weight is not always better. So that trains your thumb. Also, when you're doing pinching at your side, you're working your extensor muscles a little bit because your wrist, by the nature of the exercise, needs to be in this position. It can't be like that. It's got to be like this. And so your finger extensors are being recruited, but you can do some other things for the finger extensors. You could do some dumbbell reverse wrist curls. Now, I typically do these seated with my arm on my leg or on the edge of a bench, but you need to have your wrist supported, okay? And then you want to work primarily the top half of the range of motion from here to neutral. You don't want to let it sag down too low. That range of motion is ideal. And really, I think this is exercise where isometrics are perhaps the best way to train. Using maybe a little heavier dumbbell and just holding that top position with your wrist extended fully, and hold that for 30 seconds with a heavier dumbbell. And then when it starts to get too hard and you're fatiguing, fight it and do a slow eccentric back to the neutral position. And then when you get to neutral, stop. Again, don't drop down. And so if you do a 30 to 45 second slow isometric to a slow eccentric, that's probably the best way to train those extensor muscles, and it's therapeutic for the connective tissues. You know, lateral epicondylitis is a somewhat common injury amongst climbers, especially if you do a lot of crimping and a lot of elbow out, a lot of that chicken winging. You may be prone to getting pain in your lateral elbow. So doing this isometric or slow eccentric for 45 seconds is good stress, healthy stress for the connective tissues and for strengthening the muscles that can really pay off. Again, you know, we spend so much time training the finger flexors, we need to do some exercises for the extensors as well. And one final thing before we wrap it up that you could put together at home as a home training tool is get a piece of a wooden dowel or a broomstick. This is a piece of PVC pipe. It's a little skinnier than I would prefer. This, I believe, is about 1.25 inches in diameter. I'd prefer 1.5 inches to 2 inches. But a piece of PVC pipe with a hole and a piece of rope through it, and then some weights attached to it. And suddenly what you have here is a nifty little device, which, let me back up here. Stand with good posture and roll the weights up, okay? And add enough weight so the right amount of weight would be not so hard that you can't roll it up one time, but maybe that you can roll it 4 or 5 times up until it gets really hard, as you'll get pumped, because doing it 4 or 5 times will take about 1 minute. So that's going to kind of exhaust that anaerobic lactic energy system. And at the top of each, really finish the roll. When you get to that top position, really finish the roll. When you get to finish the roll. And then, of course, you can turn it around and go and work the extensor muscles and do, 3 to 5 roll-ups in a row, training the extensor muscles. And this will blast them in a very favorable way. So I don't want you to think of these wrist rolls as a primary form of forearm training. It's not. It's not specific to climbing at all. Hangboard training is very specific to climbing. That's kind of the main exercise. But doing at the end of the workout, especially if it's a workout, training the lactic system, doing a couple sets of those is a good way to kind of train more wrist flexion and wrist extension, which is important for wrist stability. And even hanging on sloper holds when you climb requires some wrist flexion, which you're not training so much on a hangboard. Hangboard is all about the fingertips applying force. The wrist, though engaged, is not working all that hard. Okay, so I'm at about 30 minutes and a bit out of breath from those wrist rolls. That shows that it's anaerobic. When you do an exercise that gets you out of breath, if I knocked out a set of 30 pull-ups, that would get me out of breath, because for me to do 30 pull-ups would take about 45 seconds to a minute. That would be very anaerobic for me. And so you're breathing heavily to kind of pay back that oxygen debt and metabolize the lactate, and to get your system back regaining homeostasis, which after a hard set that does get you pumped and out of breath, typically you want to rest 3 to 5 minutes before you do your next set of exercise. That is if you want to be fully recovered. Now, if you want to train in a fatigued state and have shorter rest periods, well, that's a different protocol altogether. But typically when strength endurance training, you want to have more complete rest. Okay, John, I don't know if you saw any urgent questions. If not, when I'm done with the show, I'll scan through and see if there's some questions I can give short answers to by typing into the box there. And if I see a really good question, I'll try to address it in the next episode of Training Cafe. So I guess I'll wrap up this episode with a final sip of coffee, and I'm going to wish you a enjoyable weekend. Hopefully you're in one of those states or countries where they're starting to loosen up the regulations so that you can start to get back outside, traveling and climbing outside. That's not the case here just yet in Pennsylvania, but out in some of the western states it is. So I just might need to find my way out to Wyoming or Utah in the next couple of months, because it sounds like they have dealt well with the COVID and are loosening constraints a bit so that perhaps climbers can return to the rocks in the coming weeks. So enjoy your weekend, drink more coffee, and I'll be back next Monday with the next Training Cafe. Take care.